And at this point, it's just a room full of monkeys in tuxes. And really, how do you manage a room full? Oh.
Sorry, we're back. Hi.
Hi.
How you doing?
Hi. Hi. Welcome back. I'm Christopher Harrison. That's Susan Ibach. I'll tell you the story later. And this is building websites with Python and Django. And I do need to throw out one little thing here that a couple of people pointed out, and we have since fired our editors. So actually, I guess that means we're going to have to leave because we're our editors. One of the things about doing code in PowerPoint is that PowerPoint, of course, doesn't give you things like, syntax checking. And so you're just typing away off the top of your head, and you're going, oh yeah, this looks right, this looks right, this looks right. And then you send your slides over to your esteemed colleague, and your esteemed colleague looks through and goes, hey, this looks right, this looks right, this looks right.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you go to do the presentation, and everybody in the chat window says, hey guys, you flip-flopped your $ and your caret.
Well done, sir. All right, team effort.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep. So it was good working with you, and I want to thank you. No. So yeah. So
good catch is what I want to say.
Good catch. Gold
Thank
star. Yes. You start to anchor to the beginning with a caret, and then you end with the $. And I'm now even second guessing myself one more time.
Yeah. It was caret to start,
caret,
dollar to end. So
$sign.
good catch by those of you in the chat window who were just saying, hey, didn't you get that backwards? So it's that gold star, 1,000 points for you.
Yes, 1,000 points. Wow. That's pretty generous.
Yeah.
Okay. In any event, we left off at the last module taking a look at our URL, setting all of that up, and then taking a look at how we can execute code. But all we did was we just returned back HTML, like just string literal. And doing string concatenation of HTML, I don't think that's scalable.
I keep promising that Django is going to be good for lazy coders.
Oh, yeah, that's
as a lazy coder, I do not want to be manually writing up. Plus, I mean, we've got all this data from a database we want to display.
Yeah, exactly.
So
yeah,
this is obviously.
I don't want to have to start looping through all that.
Yeah. So there's got to be a better way. Christopher, is there a better way?
As a matter of fact, there is a better way, and that is by utilizing our templates. And so that's what we're going to take a look at. So we'll take a look at the templating system that Django provides. We'll see how we can ensure consistency by using layouts, and then we're going to close everything off by taking a look at forms. Now, when we get into templates here, one of the things that you're going to notice is that the templates that Django uses are very similar to Jinja templates. Which to a certain extent are kind of similar to how Angular is going to do things and so forth. And there's sort of kind of, nothing new under the sun. And so you're going to notice a lot of very common concepts and a lot of very common syntax between a lot of different environments. Django does have its own templating system, but it is very similar to Django, so that if you, and in fact, to the point, if you took our Flask course, which uses Jinja, you'll actually notice I just reused, repurposed, recycled a lot of the slides, thank you, that I used with our Flask MVA as well, because again, they really are just that similar, which fortunately, I think kind of makes life a lot easier. So the question then is, how do we actually send back complex HTML? And the way that we're going to do that is by utilizing templates, and a template is a collection of placeholders for dynamic content. So our Django templates, it's going to look maybe a little bit like this. So we've got artist details, I've got my artist, I've got my year formed, and then we're just going to display out The Cure and 1978. So there is our very basic template. So I provide this, and then I say, hey, I want to display the artist name here, and I want to display the year that they were formed here. That's what the template is all about. Now, at its most basic, the template is really just basically HTML. They're going to typically exist inside of a folder named templates.
I like it when they do that. It's like they put the views under views, the models and models.py, settings are in settings, and now we put the templates in templates.
In templates, it's wow.
I appreciate it when they do things like that.
So there you have it. Again, you are going to notice that if you are trying to execute some bit of code, that it's going to have a similar syntax to Python, but it's not Python. So it's not actually running Python. Now, I've got a very basic little example here. But before I spend too much time on this, I'm going to answer the question that Susan is probably typing away at right now, or maybe she's not. But the question that typically comes up at this point, and came up an awful lot this morning, is, can I use Bootstrap? Now, first of all, seeing all the excitement around Bootstrap, warms my heart. But the answer is 100% absolutely. Was that the question you were answering?
No, it was actually the question I was answering is the number 2 most popular question in here, which is, will all this be recorded so that I can go back and review everything? And the answer is yes, everything we're doing here live is also recorded, and it's usually available at the Microsoft about 2-ish weeks?
2 weeks.
Yeah, I was going to say about 2 weeks after the live event, typically you'll be able to access things live. And so that just comes up a lot. So that was the question I was answering now. But Christopher, now that you bring it up, hey, is Bootstrap supported inside Django?
Yes, as a matter of fact, you can use Bootstrap with Django, because again, Bootstrap is a client-side technology, and what you're going to wind up emitting when you're using these templates is HTML. And so, in my case, I sort of have like the simplest of examples for a template, but you could absolutely use Bootstrap, and in fact, we'll see that in the next module. Now, if you take a look here at our little template example, the purple is the important part here. That all of the rest of this is just basic HTML 101. There's nothing fancy at all about that. The important part is these little placeholders right here, and it's that angle right there. And what that angle basically means is it basically means print, if you will, which used to, of course, be shortcutted as a question mark. So it means print. So what we're going to have is we're going to have a variable called name. And we're just simply going to say, hey, whatever's inside of name, print that out. And we're going to have a variable called year formed. And we're just simply going to say, print that out. That's what those 2 curly braces mean. So a curly brace. There we go. Curly brace.
Those are some rather disturbing looking curly braces, but I'll take your word on them.
They are, but they'll work. So curly brace. What that simply means is it's going to say whatever variable is inside of there, put that right there. So it acts as a placeholder for that variable. Now, the next question then becomes, well, how do we actually get a variable into there? Because if I go back and I look at this template, which I absolutely could have just copied and pasted straight from Visual Studio, or I could actually escape out of the slide and paste this into my copy of Visual Studio and make this work, you might be looking at that and you might be wondering, well, how in the world is name declared and how in the world is year form declared? And the answer is, well, it's actually not declared in the template. That in the view, I'm going to say, hey, hand this template a name, hand this template year formed, and then the template is going to call it. So if I say curly name, if I say curly year formed, inside my view, I do need to pass in those values. So that's how it's going to get into there. So you'll notice nowhere in here am I declaring name. You'll notice nowhere in here am I declaring year formed. That is going to be passed in, and if it's not there, then obviously we're going to have.
So we're simply creating placeholders for the values we want to display on the form.
Yep.
And then but we have to make sure that when the view calls that template, it provides values to put into those placeholders. Oh, I didn't give Christopher quite enough time to finish his drink of water. Sorry, you expected me to talk longer. My apologies.
Exactly. I do drink a lot of water. Although that's actually still my first bottle. In any event, so Susan also brought up the point a little while ago about what about, kind of looping through data. So, I might execute a query that's going to give us back 20 results. How do I loop through all of that? And fortunately, once again, we can do that in our template using a syntax that's similar to Python. I mean, if you looked at this, you would go, oh, okay, that's kind of close to Python, because after all, the for x in y syntax, that's straight out of Python. But if you think about Python, the problem that we have is the fact that right after that for loop, I'm supposed to have a colon. And then everything else is supposed to be tabbed in. And that poses a bit of a problem for us because, well, my tabbing is going to potentially be different in HTML versus how it would look inside of Python. So I can't really count on tabbing here. So how are we going to indicate that we're at the end of our for loop? And that's where end for comes into play. And so you'll also notice that there's like end if and everything else. And that's one of the things that I really do love about this is if you know Python, you can look at this, and even if you don't necessarily know what's going on here, you can kind of look at it and kind of figure it out, because you kind of look at it and you go, all right, for album and albums. Well, I know what that means. I know it means we're going to do a loop, and I know, and for, okay, well, I know that that means that's probably going to be the end. So it's relatively intuitive, I think, when you stop to look at it. Now, the last little thing that's worth highlighting is you are going to notice that I said for album in albums, and that's going to be the one time where I will declare something. So I said, hey, here's my variable, and you are going to notice that I can grab a name of something the exact same way that I would if I was basically anywhere else. That if I was looping through albums and I want to print out its name in just like the command line, I would say album.name, and you'll notice that's exactly how I do that here.
So in this case, it's albums is the value that would be passed in by the view. Exactly,
yeah. This is going to come from the view. Perfect point. Yep. Yeah, that's going to come from the view.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So when it comes to using a template, the basic way that we're going to wind up doing that is by utilizing this little render to response. And as it turns out, there's actually two ways that you could send a template down. You could either use render to response or you could use render. And it really is up to you as to which it is that you want to use, because either will work. They both basically do the exact same thing. The main difference between the two, as we're going to see, is that render wants the request object, and you remember that request object, that's all the data from the user. Render to response doesn't need the request object. So it really is a matter of personal preference. And if you don't mind the real quick tangent, and I know this is going to be a repeat potentially for some people because I talk an awful lot about semicolons, but it's sort of like the semicolon at the end. You can have the semicolon. I like them. You don't have to have the semicolon. Susan doesn't like them.
Nope.
And it really is up to you. So there really isn't a difference between render and render to response. To me, I think it kind of looks a little bit cleaner, but you know, whichever. All right. Now, when you're using render to response, the first parameter is going to be the name of the template. And the second parameter is going to be all of those variables. So let's kind of back the slides up here real quickly. And Susan pointed out rightly that albums needs to be passed in, not declared inside of here. And then we also mentioned previously that like name and year formed would also need to be passed in. And the question is, how are they going to be passed in? And the way that they're going to be passed in is by utilizing this syntax right here that we're actually going to pass in a collection. So just create the object right here. So our variable name, or JSON really, variable name, and then whatever we want the value to be. So if I was going to use albums, then I would need to say albums, colon, and then whatever album it is that I might want. And then I could go ahead and build it out from there. So let's actually see this in action, shall we?
Yeah, because it's always different to actually see it.
Absolutely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to my Solution Explorer there, and let me go into my templates. There we go. And so you'll notice that we've got a subfolder called templates, and then we do have a subfolder called app. Technically, we don't really have to put it all in there, but let's kind of just keep with everything else. And so I'm going to right-click right here, and you'll notice that I'm just going to create an HTML page. So there's nothing fancy here. It's just HTML. So I'm just going to create a brand new HTML page. I'm going to title this as artists. And then now I'm going to go ahead and print out all of my artists. So let's just go ahead and say H2, artists. Let's maybe add in a title, artists. So this is sort of HTML 101 here. Let's go ahead and say UL for unordered list. Let's go ahead and now start using that templated syntax.
Because everything so far has just been straight HTML.
Exactly, and that's sort of the big point here. And so now let's go ahead and say for artist in artists. I spelled that right, good. And then let's go ahead and say LI. And then let's go ahead and end our for down at the very bottom there. I always like to kind of do that right away just because I have a propensity to forget those types of things. I also have a propensity to say the word propensity.
I was about to ask if you had a propensity to say the word propensity.
As a matter of fact, I do. OK, so now what I'm going to do inside of my line item here is I'm just going to display out the artist. And remember, the double curly is going to be our placeholder there. And so now I'm going to say artist.name, and now there is my placeholder. So all I need to do inside my view is just go get my artists. So let's go into our views py file, and let's add in two little options up at the very top. So I do need that render to response if I want to use it. So I'm going to grab that. And I also am going to need my models. So from app models, let's just import in all my models. Beautiful. And so now I'm just going to comment out that line, so that way it's still there if you decide that you want to use it. I'm going to say artists equals artist.objects.all. That was what Susan showed us earlier.
That populates the artist object with all of the artists from the database.
Yep. And then I'm going to say return render to response. It's now going to ask me, okay, well, what's the name of the HTML file? And that's going to be app/artists.html.
Right.
There we go.
So that's the web page where I'm going to display my results.
Exactly. And now I also need to go ahead and set up my artists variable that we used inside of there. So we'll say artist : and then artists. And that's it. So now if I just save everything, Control-Shift-S, by the way, if you're so interested. And now let's go ahead and come on over to artists, hit refresh, and now you're going to notice that I've got all of my artists listed there. Pretty cool.
That's pretty amazing when you really think about it. You've just written code that is going to a database, retrieving all the records, taking those records back, displaying them in a template. And really, if you actually break down the amount of code you wrote to do that, it's a very small amount. And this is why Django's popular.
Exactly. That really, I kind of wrote, as far as like, what I would call true code, 2 lines, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, the class definition, okay, fine, yeah, you've got that, but that was pretty easy to put together, wasn't it?
Yeah. There's not that much to it. And this is, it's funny. We had somebody sort of going, so wait a second, how am I actually using this Django to display a website? It's like, well, it's all these pieces put together that make it work. We built our model.
Yep.
And after we built, which basically said, this is the structure of data we're going to have, then you would have code, then you would pod that database to be populated. Now you actually have somebody entering a URL that's being routed to a method that is then doing a query against the database to get the records back, and then displaying those results in a template.
That is exactly it. Yep, you hit the nail right on the head there. Okay, I was sort of doing a little bit of work in the background here. So I am going to change something real quick here. I'm just going to update my code, my URL, to use an ID parameter and just pass in the ID. And that really is just because I'm trying to keep things as straightforward as possible. And I don't want to get into having to deal with things like spaces and URL and encoding and all of that jazz. So I'm just going to use IDs here for my, to display out the details of an artist. And I'm also then going to, in turn, update this to be ID, and I'm going to clean out the rest of that code right there. OK, so, and let's just make sure that builds right now. OK, so all that I did here while Susan was talking in the background is I just made one last little change here where I said, OK, well, if you give me the ID, we'll call artist details. So now let's take a look at how we might display out some artist details here. So let me go in and create a brand new HTML page, artist details. And then let's go into our little body here. Whoa, no thank you. And let's go in and say, stop it. Let's go ahead and say, yes, I talk to my computer. When it starts talking back, that's when I know it's time to go home.
That's when we worry. Yes. Yeah. That's when we get concerned. That's when I run.
OK, in any event, let's go ahead and print something out with the name. And then let's go ahead and say H3. And let's say year formed. And then curly, artist.year formed. OK. There we go. So once again, kind of very basic. You'll notice that I'm actually going to be using dotted notation off of the artist. So we're going to be expecting an artist object back. And you'll notice that we can absolutely build that up. So sort of like before, I can just simply say artist equals artist.objects.get. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use a little bit of syntax that I always think is kind of cool is before we had get and then just simply passed in the ID, another way that we could do this is by using the letters PK. And PK is automatically built in, PK being short for primary key. Primary key. I was going to make a penalty kick joke, but
that's far too complicated. Yeah.
So now let's go ahead and one more time, let's say return render to response, and I'm just going to cheat here. And let's go ahead and say artist, and let's say artist. And this was going to be artist details. And make sure that I've got all my typing correct.
Yeah, looks right.
Save everything. And let's bring back up my browser. And now let's go ahead and say artist/1. And there's the cure. And let's go ahead and say artist/2. And then there is REM. Now let's close all of this off because obviously we don't want people navigating directly to artist/1, artist/2. Let's give them some links, shall we?
Yeah, because you can't expect a user to know those sort of direct URLs.
Exactly. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come back here and I'm going to say anchor href equals, and let's say /artists, /, and then you'll notice that I'm actually going to put in the curly right into an HTML string literal. So what will wind up happening is this is going to wind up building up our URL for us. So this will now say artist/ and then the ID of the artist. So let's one more time hit save. Let's one more time come back to our browser. And now you're going to notice that I've got my links there.
Yep.
And then I'll click on cure. There's the cure. And I'll click on REM. And then there is REM. Pretty slick.
That's a much more typical way that a website navigation is going to work.
Exactly. Exactly. So just like that, we've now been able to use our HTML, and forgive me for just kind of beating on this drum over and over and over again, because there's been a lot of questions, could I use Angular? Could I use Bootstrap? Absolutely. You can use whatever client-side technology it is that you want. I just wrote plain HTML. I did nothing fancy here. I just wrote some basic HTML, and away we went. I got to kind of confess something, Susan.
Uh-oh.
That's great for being able to, read data. How about, sending data back?
Oh, you mean if I want to let a data enter user? Yeah. You mean user entering data, like placing orders, or say, apparently I need caffeine as well. So no, exactly. That's still we still only got a one-way conversation with our user.
Exactly.
We need to have that two-way conversation so they can give us information, tell us about new albums recorded by their favorite bands.
And that's exactly it. And that's where forms come into play. Now, you could, if you wanted to, create your own custom forms. I mean, you could just go in and start saying input type equals text, input type equals email, and all that good stuff. You could absolutely go in and do that. But the problem with doing that is it does require additional work, because it's going to be up to me to now go in and work with all of that. I now have to go in and create the form. I now have to go in and, most importantly, update the form when there's been changes to the model.
Right, because if you change something from a numeric field to a character field, or you added a new field, the form's not going to magically know you've done that and change everything for you.
Exactly, exactly. So can Django create forms for us? Well, as a matter of fact, it can, because really it'd kind of been silly to create the slide if it couldn't. So yeah, absolutely, Django can create forms for us in one of two ways. So one way that we can do this is by creating a form class, and another way to do this is by binding it to a model. So the way that we could do this with a form class is exactly as you see right here, is that you'll notice that we do need to import in forms, sort of like we had to import in models earlier.
Yep.
And then we create a brand new form, and we inherit from forms.form. Now, Susan.
That looks awfully familiar. It looks a lot like the code we wrote when we were creating our model.
That's exactly it. So let's think about things for a couple of minutes here. When Susan was writing code for her model, what she was doing is she was essentially designing a back-end database. I mean, yes, she was creating a class, but she was designing a back-end database. And so as part of that process, she had to say, well, I want this column to be this, and I want this column to be this. Well, let's think about now we're creating a form. And what's a form going to need to know? It's going to need to know, okay, well, what values are we going to be asking for, and what data types are they supposed to be? Well, that's exactly what we're doing right here, is we're setting up our form and we're describing all of this data. Now, the biggest thing that you want to avoid in code whenever possible is duplication. You don't want to repeat the exact same code. So if we go back and we look at this again, it's basically the exact same code that Susan wrote. I don't want to write that again.
Yeah, it's true.
So I'm not going to. So one of the very cool things that you can do is you can actually bind your form to a model. And the way that you do that is by utilizing a model form. And so you're going to notice that, once again, I'm going to do an import here. And then you're going to notice that I'm going to create a brand new class. I'm going to call it, in my case, artist form, and I'm going to say model form. So
you're inheriting model form now.
Exactly. Instead of form, model form. Exactly. And then what I'm going to do is inside of my model form, I'm going to create a meta class. It just has to be called meta. Just take that tantamount to magic. And I'm going to define two things. Number one is I'm going to define, this is the model that I now want you to use.
Okay.
And then number two, these are the fields that I want you to go grab. So for example, I probably don't want you to be able to set the ID.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to list the ID as a field. Or there might be other, private things in here that
you don't always want people to see all of the data. There might be data you use behind the scenes for calculations and so on. So,
exactly, yeah. So I don't want to get in and start doing all of that. And so now I can just simply say, well, I just want name and I just want year formed, and that's it. That's all that I have to do. Now, you could create this inside the models class, or the models file, rather. I actually kind of like that, just because that way I can see this is the model, and then this is the associated form. And in fact, let's just get in and do that. Where's my models here? There we go. So I'm just going to, you'll notice that right from here, we've got Django import forms. And I'm just going to come right down here, and I'm going to say class artist form, and I'm going to say forms model form. There we go. And then I'm going to say class meta, and then I'm going to say model equals, and then we'll just go ahead and say artist, and then I'm going to say fields. Whoops. There we go. Fields equals, and then list off all the fields, and that's going to be name, and then that's going to be year formed. That's it. So now I've told Django, hey, I want you to look at the artist class, and I've told Django, these are the fields that I want editable. It really is just that straightforward. So I've got the code to generate the form. The next question then becomes, maybe why do this? Well, the advantage is that the form is automatically going to be updated. Also, as we're going to see, has the ability to automatically validate the data. But here's what I also really like, is it even has the ability to just save directly for me. Because let's again go back and look at my code here. So once again, here's my form. So it knows how to be a form, right, Susan?
Yep.
Okay. It also knows about my model, right, Susan?
Yep.
Cool. Now, our model inherits from model, right?
Correct.
And so if it inherits from model, it's going to have all the methods from model. And if we actually want to put something back into a database, what was the name of that method?
There was a save method. If we called the save method on that class, then it would save, insert new records or make updates to the database.
That's exactly it. Cool. So it's now going to save that back to the database. Well, I know that, and Susan knows that, and now all of our fine listeners know that, and Django knows that. So Django knows on artist that there is in fact a save method, and Django also knows how to take all of the data from the form and create an artist for us. So behind the scenes, it's going to have the ability to look at all the data, because we've told it that we need things like a positive integer and a character field with a maximum length of 50. It knows all of that. It also knows that this is going to be bound up to artist, so it's going to be able to dynamically create an artist for us. And then last but not least is it knows that there's a save method and is going to be able to call that save method for us. So it's able to do all of that automatically for us. Now, does that come at a cost? Sort of. So one of the things that we talked about this morning is the fact that Django can do all of that, and it can do all of that magically. Trying to maybe get it to the exact format is going to take maybe a little bit of additional work. And I don't want to say that it can't be done, and I don't want to give you that impression. It just takes a little bit of additional work. In fact, I don't even want to say that it's difficult.
It takes time.
Yeah, it just takes a little bit of extra time, and you'll actually notice there's a great community around Django. And so if you fire up Bing and just do a search for Django forms and maybe like Bootstrap, which seems to be the magic word of the day, then you can find all sorts of different add-ons and plugins and libraries and otherwise that will allow you to use the model form and have it generate the appropriate Bootstrap code for you rather than you having to use the default. But I've got an object. If I'm going to display something in a browser, I need HTML. I need to create a bit of HTML. So I need a page that's actually going to host it. And there it is in its very simplest form. So it's just simply going to be form method and post, simply meaning that it's going to use post to send it up. There's my little save button. There's my close form. Now, this part right here, this little form, this is actually just like normal template binding. So one of the things that we're going to do in a few minutes is we're going to actually call this just like we would any normal template. And we're just simply going to say, hey, here is your form. So we're just going to go back in and do that. Now, one of the things that I mentioned this morning was about security. And in fact, a lot of people have been asking, for example, about SQL injection. That's probably the 5th most common question that we've gotten today. And the thing about Django is that it will automatically take care of SQL injection for you. It will automatically clean all of that up for you, so you don't have to worry about SQL injection. Well, one of the other challenges that you can run into is somebody spoofing your form. So I want to send down an HTML form. I want you on my site. When you submit it, I want you using the form that I gave you. Somebody can spoof that. And so that is where that little CSRF token comes into play, is that it's going to send down a little hashed value and then expect that value back. And if it doesn't get that value back, or if it's been tampered with, it's going to go, aha, wait a minute, you did not come from my site. You're using a different form. I don't want you sending me data. I want you using my form to send me data. What I love about Django, because basically every web technology gives you the ability to do something like this, Django forces you into this, that if you use a form and you don't give it this token, it's going to fail on you. And I really like that, just because it's going to enforce that security. Because on top of that, it's also something that's pretty easy to forget. And I'm actually going to cheat here. I've got the code right there. There's no sense in retyping it in. So let's go in and create a brand new HTML page. And I'm actually just going to call this create. And I'm just going to put that form, boom, right in there. Now, you know, Susan.
Yes, Christopher.
I want you to take a look at my HTML there. Is there anything on there that says anything at all about artist?
There is absolutely nothing in there that indicates in any way, shape, or form what data I'm going to see.
So could I use that exact same form, do you think, maybe with album?
I don't see anything that would be different. If I was recreating, I think it'd look exactly the same code.
There you go. And that's one very cool thing, is that the code to create the form is not here. The code to create the form is back here. Let me highlight it. Right there. That's the code to actually create the form. So I could keep reusing this as needed. So as long as all I need in this simple little example is a save button, I'm good. Nothing else that I have to do. And that's one of the things that I really love about this, because you know, if you're having to constantly go back and create forms and edit forms and so forth, that does become you know, a little bit tedious. Now, the last little thing that is worth mentioning here is that is the simplest way to do it. And by default, what Django will do is it will create the form as a table. If you wanted to use P elements instead, paragraph elements, or maybe you wanted to use an unordered list instead, then you could actually go in and do that by just going in and saying .as and then P for paragraph, or as UL for an unordered list. And I think the paragraph display is a little bit better.
Yeah, that's, again, a bit of a personal preference, the style you want.
Exactly. And the last thing that I would mention is it's even possible to grab the actual fields and completely customize that HTML. So if you did want to do Bootstrap with this, you absolutely can. And still, by the way, make it dynamic. So I could actually loop through all the fields inside the form, and then I could go ahead and grab the label. I could grab the actual form field. I could grab whatever the error placeholder is going to be, and I could choose where I want that to appear on the page. If I want to add in my own custom classes, say for Bootstrap, then I absolutely can do that. Okay, now how do we actually use it? Well, the way that we're going to use it is you'll notice that we've got that same definition that we had before. So there is our, there is our define create, and then the request. So the exact same. And now what we're going to do is we're going to look to see if we're getting a get or a post. So on get, all that we want to do is just show you the form. And you'll notice that the way that we're going to show you the form is we're going to treat that form like an object and pass it into the template. So we're using skills that we already have. Susan and I were actually here the other day. We were putting together an intro Python course. We actually had a physical toolbox here. So if I had a toolbox here, I would be reaching into the toolbox and I would be pulling out the two tools that we already have. Number one is the ability to create a template. Number two is the ability to put an object into that template. That's exactly what we're doing here. We're doing that exact same thing. Is number one, I'm going to create an object, artist form.
Yep.
Number two is I'm going to pass that into the template. So there's nothing that's different here. Yeah, I know my slide has render as opposed to render to response, but that's it. Mm-hmm. So it's nothing that we haven't already learned. Now, as far as actually getting the data back.
And we just had a question in the Q&A window about that. Is, hey, when the data comes back, what happens to the data?
Funny question. Now, again, I could, if I wanted to, start looking through all of the fields inside of the post statement. I could, but really, I've got better things to do with my time. So let's kind of, again, refresh here. Is I created an object or a class, and I told that class, this is how I want you to create the form, and I bound it. I bound that to artist. So it knows all about artist, and it knows how to create an artist. On top of that, it also knows how to look at data that's been sent up to the user as part of that form and create the artist object based on that data. So I don't have to read through the form. I don't have to read the user data. All that I have to do is simply go grab it. So you're going to notice this time I'm going to create a brand new instance of artist form, but this time I'm going to say, hey, take all of the user data. This is what the user sent up to us, and use that to create a brand new instance of that artist form. And so that's going to have, in our case, name and year formed. And then I'm going to call save. And what's cool about save is that it will automatically check the data for us, make sure that it's valid, and if it's not, would actually throw an error, and then it will go ahead and save that back to the database. So there's nothing else that I need to do. So I don't actually need to go to the artist and read values or anything like that. I can do that directly off of the form object. Oh.
That was a nice little line there.
Yeah, there we go. All righty.
Just had an urge to draw.
Apparently. Yeah. Okay. Now, once again, I'm just going to make my life a little bit easier, just save a little bit of typing here. I'm going to go back into views, and I'm just going to add that in. I'm just going to put that up at the very top, and I'm going to call this artist create, because you'll kind of notice that I'm using a little bit of a naming scheme here. So artist create, and I think I've got everything wired up properly. I do. Cool. And now let's just go in to our URLs, and let's go ahead and add in one for create. So I'm just going to put that right up here. So I'm going to say URL and my raw, and let's go ahead and say artists create and my dollar, and let's go ahead and say app views artist create, and let's say name equals artist create. Beautiful. Okay. So once again, here's what I did. is I created our little HTML placeholder that's going to have the form inside of it. I went ahead and I created there's my models pie. I created the form, bound that up to the model, and then I went ahead and created the view that's now going to be able to store all of that. So let's go ahead and one more time hit save. Let's come back over here, and now let's go to /create. Hit enter. So it'll ask me for the name of the band, and let's go ahead and say U2, and then the year that they were formed, and
I have no idea.
76.
Okay.
We'll say 76. And then let's go ahead and hit save. Oh, I need response redirect. Dang it.
Forgot to import it?
Yeah.
Can't call something from a library you haven't imported.
Nope. Response redirect. Beautiful. Okay. Let me actually go back to artist. I just want to show that it did in fact create it. You'll notice that U2 is in fact now there. So now let's go back into create and let's go ahead and make Susan happy.
There we go.
There we go.
Get some good Canadian music in there. Thank you.
And then. Sorry. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit save, and now you'll notice that that we had great big C. How about that? U2 was, according to Wikipedia, 1976. How about this guy?
Wow, well done.
This guy, thank you.
That's 500 points for you.
Yes.
All right. And a gold star.
And a gold star. Beautiful. All right. So in any event, so what we saw there is how Django can build that form for us. And I'm just going to wrap all of this up just by going back to what we said this morning. You know, a lot of people are asking, you know, why do you use Django? What does Django bring to the table? That's what Django brings to the table, is that real quick, easy ability to just, boom, here's my object, boom, create the form for me, and away you go. And there's nothing else that you have to do. So beautiful. All right, 1976. I'm very proud of myself. With that, I'm going to go bask in the glow of knowing that little bit of trivia off the top of my head, or guessing at it. We'll go ahead and take a break, and then we're going to come back and close off with 3 last things. We're going to take a look at how we can do consistent layouts using our templates. We're going to take a look at the basics of Bootstrap in 5 minutes or less, and then we'll finish it all off deploying this out to Azure. But until then, we'll see you guys in 10.